Jason Adler. I've been with the hospital, like she said, 11 years. Most recent position is the CEO since December. Prior to that, I was the chief of finance. And I started at the hospital 11 years ago as our senior analyst in finance. So I've been there a long time. Love the hospital, love our mission, our employees. It was wonderful. We've grown a ton in the last 11 years I've been there, and primarily the last 6 to 7 years we've really grown. We've about doubled all of our services. Still can't keep up with the demand. Lots going on in healthcare across the country and the world. So asked to talk on federal implications going on. There's lots going on both the federal and state level. Thankfully, KVH is pretty well out of direct impacts, but we'll have a lot of indirect impacts of the things that are going on at both the state and federal level. So the one that's on the federal level is what they call their directed payment program, and the state calls it a safety net assessment program. So it's a matching program where the state collects some funds, and then the federal government will match those funds and then send that money out to hospitals who are serve a larger population of Medicaid or underserved population. So it helps offset the low reimbursements for Medicaid or uninsured individuals. For KVH, our direct impact of that program is about $2 million a year. So it's a really significant amount of money that is potentially on the table. Most recently this week, I've heard suggested from CMS that those funds will still continue to flow. And then the next obstacle, though, is the state. So the state has a $10 to $15 billion budget deficit, and the state is proposing raiding those funds and not passing them on to the hospitals as they're intended. So the state calls this program the Safety Net Assessment Program. So it allocates the matched federal funds to the state's hospitals based on the number of Medicaid or underserved population that we serve. So the federal government saying that they will still pay those funds, and the state yet, until they pass their budget, we don't know if they'll use those funds for something else than they're intended. So we are hoping that they will use it as intended, and we'll continue to get that during the $2 million. Other things impacting Medicaid or underinsured is the Affordable Care Act or the Marketplace health insurance plans. So people can go online through the Marketplace Health Plan Finder and purchase plans, and those who have a lower income qualify for subsidized health plans where the federal government pays a portion of the premium, and then the state also jumped in and pays a portion of the premium. So the government is looking at scaling back those subsidies. So what that means for KVH, it's not a direct impact, but an indirect impact, because it could cause more people to go uninsured, and an uninsured population typically pays very little on their bills when they seek services, so it'll be an indirect impact to us there, which would cause us to have a higher financial assistance or a higher write-off for providing services that are not paid. And then on top of that, our state changed in 2021, changed the amount of uncompensated care that we have to offer to the public by double. So it costs us about $2 to $3 million a year addition that we write off in services to the underserved population. So that's really the impacts from the federal level for both direct and indirect. I'm happy to take questions too on it. Otherwise, I have a little bit from the state level too.
Well, just for context of how much that $2 million is, what's the total annual budget?
Our total annual budget is about $140 million in expense. Good question.
Why don't we handle questions at the end, and that way if folks need a piece of paper to write your questions on so you don't forget them, I can give you those things, but let's save our questions to the end if you don't mind, please. All right, thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from Heidi. No. Yes. Oh, no.
I've got a little bit more on the state stuff.
Oh, all right. You have more to say? Very good.
So state impacts, the state is currently going through their budget cycle and they have a $10 to $15 billion deficit. So the state is trying to touch everything to carve money out and raise taxes in various areas. Again, there isn't really direct impacts to KVH. They're not saying we're cutting Medicaid, we're cutting this, but it's indirect implications that will definitely impact us, and they will pass some tax increases and they will cut some programs. State proposes include a 1% increase on all B&O tax for any entity that has more than $250 million in revenue. So KVH falls under that, so we aren't directly impacted. However, KVH really relies on large tertiary hospital systems to provide services to the networks of other critical access or rural hospitals. So all your larger systems, Virginia Masons, University of Washington, all those, they will have an impact financially by this piece of legislation. And then they will have to cut their programs, their expenses. That can indirectly impact us. Additional one is the state is proposing adding a 5% employer paid payroll tax to anybody that earns over $176,000 a year. So again, this is all of our higher compensated individuals, all of our physicians, all our providers the employer will pay a 5% tax for their salaries, which again has to get paid for somehow, so it passes through the employees or to those that seek services, or just makes us more financially vulnerable. So that would be a direct impact. And then the state is passing a legislation, or in the process of passing legislation, that caps the reimbursement that state-insured, commercially insured individuals who seek services at a hospital, what their insurance company will pay back to a hospital. So basically, it's lowering the reimbursement that hospitals are getting for commercially insured population through the state's insurance plan. So it's kind of like nobody likes the cost of their insurance increasing. The premiums increase every year with inflation. So the state's trying to pass legislation that says we don't want the premium hikes increases. So instead of increasing those premiums, just pay all the hospitals less, which doesn't exactly work when we have our own bills to pay as well and resources. So again, an indirect impact, but it will absolutely direct or impact healthcare. And it's targeted to healthcare only. Other cuts that will be going on, the state is looking at cuts to the adult and children's dental programs. So the state had increased kind of their dental offerings for adults and children on the underserved Medicaid plans. So they'll be rolling those back, and dental health has an absolute impact on your overall health as well. And then they're proposing changes to the age, the blind, and disabled fee-for-service program, and they're not cutting, but they're making it a lot more complex. And the state's idea of more complex means it'll be harder for others to navigate and actually receive those benefits. And then they have cuts proposed for people with intellectual disabilities. So the state is the one that we're looking at the most right now. That's all I have.
I'm not sure I deserve the credit for that as much as the need in the community deserves the credit for that. I think that, first of all, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for doing this evening, because I think it's really important information. And I give credit to each of you for coming to hear it, because it isn't easy to think about all of this, and it can be overwhelming. So I have a friend today who told me that she stopped watching the news, she watches the cartoon channel because she can't handle it anymore. So I'm glad you're here, and thank you for coming. I think the best way for me to talk to you about the impact of some of these things are having on us and the way that we are able to serve the community is just by going line by line with our lines of business, because it's such a domino that it's hard, really, if you don't know everything that we do, it's hard to understand the impact one to the other. And this is not going to be a 3-hour presentation, so don't get nervous about it. But first of all, we're a food bank. And as a food bank, our customers are the food pantries in Kittitas County. And I think that's important for everyone to understand, because whatever happens to the food bank doesn't just happen to the Ellensburg pantry, it happens to all of the pantries. And we work through a contract with the state of Washington. We, as a food bank, we receive, warehouse, and distribute food to the food pantries in the county. And that's Cleellum Hope Source, Community Church in Easton, the Wildcat Pantry at CWU, and the Poyo, and of course our own pantries in Ellensburg. Last year, our food bank distributed 2.5 million pounds of groceries in the county. And I mention that just to give you some perspective of what we do. The food bank is already feeling the impact of some of these changes. There's a program late in January, towards the end of January, a program that provided 18 million pounds of food for the state of Washington was reduced by 40%. And that happened for every single state in the country. Tens of millions of pounds of food were reduced. And that, when you get down to Fish's level, what that means to us is we have 13,500 pounds of food less than we did before this reduction. We share that food with all of the other pantries. So that means that together we have lost that much food. And to put it in perspective, when a person or a family comes to Fish, they average about 160 pounds of food every 2 weeks. So I'll give you some idea. To lose that much food every month is, it pinches. It doesn't bring us to our knees, but it pinches. A program that we absolutely loved and hated to lose was the Local Food Purchase Assistant, or the LFPA. It's just a wonderful program. It's a win-win, and it's done as of the end of December. So it's a program that provides funding to states to purchase local and regional food for distribution to hunger relief organizations. It's a great way. We would receive, the way it worked, we would receive $7,000 a month to purchase from local farmers and local food producers. And we would be able to buy milk and eggs and meat and fresh produce. Now, those are the things that people come to a food pantry for. They can afford cans of beans. They don't need to come to us for that. But to get fresh produce, to get eggs, and to be able to put some protein on the table, that's a big deal. And so now we have $7,000 less capability of making that happen for them. Those are also the kinds of things that we don't normally get through donations, because they're fragile, and people give us pasta and they give us things that are shelf stable, which is wonderful. Don't stop. But it's the other things that also keep people healthy. And right now we are not able to do that. And because we don't have it, we cannot share it. So that's another way that the food bank and the food pantries work together. And I think it's a perfect example of the domino effect that we seem to see so often lately. The food bank no longer has the $7,000, so it's not going into the economy. It's not going to the farmers anymore, so they don't have $7,000. And the pantries are not getting the food, and therefore the community is not getting the food. So it's just beginning. Now, nationally, I think this is interesting. Nationally, the effect of the LFPA cut is $1 billion in local food purchasing for for schools and food banks. So that's $1 billion the farmers are not getting. The EFAP, which is the state supplemental food program, is level. That's good news. So we heard just this week that it will remain level for the next year. So that's excellent news. After that, we don't know, but right now we're okay. The food pantries. There's so many things. I've talked to you a little bit about how the changes with the food bank will affect the food pantries. Well, other things will affect them as well. And I don't mean to sound speculative here, but we are aware of these things, and we are advocating to protect all of these areas. So Medicaid, a change in Medicaid will affect the food pantry, because people who use food pantries are, especially ours, and I'm sure that Susan would say the same thing as she would hope for. They're young families. They're families who are trying to get a foothold. They have children. Sometimes it's two-income families, and they are the people who rely on Medicaid for their family to keep them healthy. So if Medicaid is cut, money's going to go to health care, and they'll rely even more heavily on us. The same thing with Medicare, Social Security, with government offices closing and the ripple effects of people not having jobs. All of that will affect food pantries all across the country. Maybe not fish as much as some others, but it is going to have a devastating effect on food pantries. So basically, we're coming down to the fact that we're going to have more need and less food. SNAP, the reductions in SNAP benefits will definitely have an effect on us. When the COVID stipend went away after COVID, our Ellensburg pantry had an 80% increase in clients just from that change in SNAP. To reach the proposed $230 billion in funding costs, the federal government is looking at significant cuts to those benefits. Bottom line, benefit cuts to SNAP, it's food insecurity, financial hardship will increase, both of those things will increase, and healthy outcomes will worsen. So that's the grocery division. We also have meal service. We have open table meal service. It's the blue building that you either love or hate, because I hear it all the time on Main Street, that people either love or hate that color. And we also have a division there that's healthy table, medically supported food and nutrition services. The open table, we have a contract with Southeast Washington Aging and Long-Term Care to provide senior nutrition lunches and home delivered meals, Meals on Wheels, through that contract. Over the past year, we've had almost 100% increase in those two programs. The Older Americans Act, it has been in jeopardy, and it is the act that pays for Meals on Wheels. As most of you know, Kate Leonard can tell you for sure, she volunteered for that program. That's so much more than a meal. That home delivery, going into someone's home, the wellness check, our drivers are trained in social determinants of health, and they're offered training as community health workers if they choose to do it. So it's more than just dropping off a meal and going away. And also, one thing that a lot of people don't know is we also deliver lunch for the pets. We deliver pet food to people who are on Meals on Wheels. Because frankly, we found out if we didn't, they were giving their lunches to their pets. So, and that's not good nutrition for anybody, right? So we developed a pet food program. We have a community lunches program that is unfunded, and that program is also will be in jeopardy if we continue to see increases of the numbers that we've seen over the last year. It's going to be very difficult for us to continue that lunch program if we are receiving funding cuts in these other areas. Though we understand right now, because the government funds, the money for all of that comes from the federal government. The aging long-term care gets their funding from the state, but it's a pass-through from the federal government. So cuts there are going to be difficult, and if we are hearing right now, we are safe, we are fine through 2026, but after that, we aren't sure. The money comes in 2-year increments. We also are very interested in Medicaid and Medicare because we have medically tailored meals that we offer in partnership with healthcare organizations. We get referrals from healthcare and we prepare and deliver meals that have been especially planned to mitigate certain chronic diseases, diabetes, cancer, hypertension, renal disease, all of that, and those are evidence-based medical interventions that right now we have a Medicaid waiver that will pay for medically tailored meals. We're hoping that does not get rescinded. It has in some other states, but right now we have that much money. If Medicaid goes away, that funding will also go away. And we have a bill in Congress right now for Medicare to also pay for that, which would be a huge benefit to any senior. I say that like I'm not, right? But it's a huge benefit because it keeps people, good nutrition keeps people healthy and keeps them home. And that's the goal, is to cut out that very expensive next level of care. And this is an evidence-based program that has not only proven to increase good health outcomes, but also to dramatically reduce the cost of health care. I was going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we're doing to mitigate these, but I'll wait because I think I've gone over my time limit, but I will wait, and you can certainly ask me questions about what steps we're taking to make sure that we can continue to serve the community through whatever comes, because we're committed to doing that.
So, tall order.
Thank you. And again, thank you everyone for spending your evening with us. I always appreciate when people are curious and they ask questions and they show up to listen to the answers. And so I'm happy to be here tonight. I love my job. I get to serve an amazing community. I've been here for about 4 years and just continue to grow and learn and appreciate everything we have in this community. So, and I will tell you, Peggy, I love the dark blue building. So, thank you. So I prepared a few slides, and it's for the visual learners in here to kind of help walk through, and just to share a little bit about some of the impacts from the city. And a lot of folks oftentimes don't think a whole lot about what the city does. Sometimes people think of their local government as we do everything. And if you remember the Constitution and the federalist system, essentially, we are a system of government. And so the the Constitution delegates certain powers, and some of those are delegated to the states. The states can delegate certain actions and powers to counties and cities. And so really a political subdivision. We don't do everything. We do those things that are really essential public services at a local level. And so I like to think about, our local government does things that nobody else can do because it doesn't make a profit, and it protects public safety generally and adds to the quality of life. So if you think about your daily life, you wake up in the morning, you're in a safe building. Guess who made sure that that building was safe to build and safe to inhabit? You turn on the lights. The city of Ellensburg is one of the few municipalities that actually provides an electric utility to our community. You go to turn on the water, we provide the water, and maybe you have a gas water heater, and that helps you warm. We also are one of two municipalities in the state of Washington that provide a natural gas service to the community as well. And so, and again, we flush that toilet. Yes, it treats the refuse that goes down into the system. Make sure we have clean water for our community. You're walking out in the streets and the sidewalks, those are provided by the city as well. And again, when you call 911, we ensure that there's somebody who shows up. So really adding to the quality of life and in our community and public safety. So as I looked at this, thinking about where we have federal dollars that are part of our community again, and so if you want to advance, Karen, I kind of started looking at the sort of the projects that we have and just a little overview of where dollars, because where dollars are infused, federal dollars into what we do here locally. So one of the things we do are oftentimes they're one-time sort of generally smaller activities and generally for planning. And so we have a couple of grants, and these are one-time grants that help out with cybersecurity. And our community forestry plan was something that came through the Department of Natural Resources. That really is the number one program that we had received notice on. We actually signed the paperwork to do this. This is part to help us out with our urban tree planning. We're going to update our tree ordinances. We're doing some additional tree inventories in town. And the day after we signed the agreement for the grant, on January 28th, we received notice that the funding was paused. And so, and about a month later, the funding was released. And so one of the things we're doing to mitigate programs that we know could be in jeopardy is making sure that we have the ability to have a termination clause in those agreements as we move forward. And we're trying to move forward fairly quickly with some of the grants that have been provided to the city to do, especially some of our project work. We do have a historic preservation grant, and this year, I believe, we are working on a story. This is a federal grant, again, that gets passed through the state, and it's from the Federal Historic Preservation Fund through the Certified Local Government Program to do some extra work. So a lot of these grants are things to do on top of our basic essential services. We have some development grants. Our police department gets some federal pass-through dollars for the state to help out with our bulletproof vests. And we actually happened to do a one-time pass-through grant actually for fish. There's an error in the federal legislation, and they gave the money that was supposed to go to fish to the city. So we're providing a pass-through grant, and Peggy's building some amazing things with those dollars. And so there's some balance left on that. So we'll go to the next. One thing cities do, we do a lot of our projects, our staff are really great about getting projects ready to go, and so when we find funding paths available, we can move very quickly and have shovel-ready projects. They did an amazing job this last year at securing some dollars. These are projects that some will be planned this year and some are actually being built this year. The 3rd Avenue project is a sidewalk project that will actually do Peterstone sidewalks from, I believe it's Water Street to the depot, and so that project has been on our list for over a decade, I believe. Advantage Highway, we were able to secure about almost $1.9 million for that project. This is a planning year for that, and the construction will take place next year. And that is really the gap from essentially where the sidewalk ends on Adler Street, where our Gateway 3 will begin. So we'll have connectivity on both sides of the street, a shared use pathway and sidewalks all the way to the city's boundary on the east side for Advantage Highway long term. So what we're doing with those is trying to get all of those under contract as quickly as possible. Again, for those for the first 2, we're trying to work swiftly to get the planning pieces done and try to secure through agreement. And the Water Street overlay is a new one. The Quadco area, which is a 4-county area, that they had some extra dollars actually across the state that other jurisdictions weren't moving, so we were able to secure that. And Water Street, if you haven't noticed, they started this week, and this will be a little bit painful. They're going to redo the entire, repay the entire Water Street at ADA access ramps, all the way from Manitoba to Bender Road. And so a huge project, really great work by our staff to secure the dollars, and it is under contract and under construction as we speak. So grid modernization, this is actually something that came through the Department of Energy. We have been working, this is a 2023 congressionally directed spending grant, and we have worked for the last almost 3 years to get this under contract, and we were finally able to do so. We are looking at spending again for grid modernization and also some solar improvements with our solar energy park as well. Middle Mile Fiber was a pasture grant that came to, we're using it to connect our well services. So we have 3 wells about 5 miles west of town off of Highway 10. And we're connecting those by fiber, so we can actually monitor those differently and respond. And so it's been our goal to connect all of our city resources to our fiber. And we were able to use this grant to do that because we're also connecting with a wireless broadband provider to provide broadband to unserved areas, homes in that community as well. And that project is almost finished. That's been almost a 2-year project as well. The field house, we also received, we had applied for about $7 million in funding. That was reduced through appropriations to about $500,000. And so the way the language was written, we're working very, trying to be able to reimburse some of our early planning dollars that we spent, the dollars that we got back from the insurance settlement to do some planning because we had a tight timeline on that project. And so we're going to be able to reimburse the majority of the costs in order to make sure we have the most amount available for a future field house project. And then the last 2 are some interesting grants we received again through the congressionally directed spending process. And about a little under $1 million to do a methane recapture at our wastewater treatment plant. And that's right now we burn off the methane from that process, and it was the idea was to get a project that we could capture that methane and reuse it either back into the system for heat or sell it or use it again as renewable natural gas. The Utility Advisory Committee for the city is looking at, we actually did some studies on that. It's going to be about a $5 million project, and it really will not have long-term payoffs. So we're going to look at some other opportunities. So some of the last 2 grants are ones that we may or may not be able to use just for other conditions. And the final piece on the infrastructure here is our sewer main project. We applied for some dollars to help out with our sewer main project on Anderson Road. We were able to use some of the COVID dollars that came through in order to do that project. And that actually loops our sewer main, and it actually eliminates a lift station, which is a long-term kind of risk in our system. And so we were able to fund that in other ways. We were able to move this, but the grant actually, oftentimes federal dollars come with, I tell the folks, ropes rather than strings, and so there are a lot of hoops to jump through. This one had written into it that the Army Corps of Engineers had to do the project, and so just based on the federal, sort of the reduction in federal workforce and the time it's taken us to actually work with them to get some details about that grant, we may not be able to work and use that money. All right, and then primarily, as you saw, the projects that we do are generally kind of one-time projects, and so we always look at the what-ifs, and our staff are keeping an eye on all of the federal registers and executive orders. One of the things that we're looking at, and because it's one of the services that we actually use federal dollars for operations, and so and that means we rely on that on a regular basis, and so our transit operations. And we get a number of federal pass-through dollars, so the Federal Transportation Administration provides those monies to states to pass out for rural transit programs and things like that. And so the federal portion of that this year is about a little over $600,000. We have some other, what I would consider operating grants that we rely on these things for regular, these sources for regular activities. One is the DUI enforcement grant, and I talked to the police chief, and he said, we'll just stop doing the work if we have to. And so it's dollars that help support, the federal government provides pass-through dollars to the state for us to do more DUI enforcement activities, and those are things that we can change sort of the service level on that we provide to. And then our senior foot care program. This is a really well-used program at the Adult Activity Center, and that's a federal pass-through dollars that we act to make sure folks have access to those basic services in our community. One of the projects we are working on, and we're just at the early stages of application, and this is a CDBG grant, and that's a community development block grant. So we are looking at the health homes and library. It was a really tough budget year for the city this last year. Inflation has really taken a bite out of everything, and really all the costs for every single project, and all of our labor costs have gone up significantly. So we had some unfunded projects and also some deferred maintenance, but we know our HVAC systems in the library and health homes, we're looking at about a $2 million replacement for those. They are not small, they take up 2 huge rooms in the facilities, and so we're looking at applying for those dollars. If we don't get those dollars, we're going to have some rough times, and so I will tell you, our maintenance person is there almost every morning, making sure that they have heat. So that's a lot of resource, and again, building buildings is one thing, but maintaining and making sure we do maintenance on buildings is altogether another thing, and very expensive. And then finally, just thinking about the impacts, and I talked a little bit about the system of government, that we are all very much interconnected, and systems we rely on. Our transportation projects, I just showed a short list of those that are federally funded. They are very expensive. It is really expensive to build streets or to engineer our streets, and really, having only local dollars go into that is a lot for the community, because those aren't dollars that people pay a fee to use your streets, and those are shared with all of our other general services, like our libraries and our parks and our police as well. So they compete. And so one of the things we know that we have to be very agile in this environment. And so again, we've looked at our watching. Again, we look at federal registers, trying to keep an eye on if there are any mandates or different changes to law that we need to be responsive to. Right now, I think I've used the word uncertainty about 50 times every single day for the last few months. We live in this time where things are changing, and keeping an eye and being ready to adapt as we know more information is really important. I wanted to talk a little bit about the library, because I think my fellow colleagues here have talked a little bit about the indirect impacts and what we often don't think about. And that is, how we rely on those systems in order to provide the basic services, and we don't think about those. The library systems, one of their concerns is looking especially into the 2026. Again, the federal budget ends the 30th of September typically, and so it's sort of new. And looking at the IMLS, or let's see here, Institute of Museum and Library Science is a federal agency, and they do pass-through dollars for a lot of resources that go to state libraries and also local libraries. As a rural local library, we depend on a lot of those resources. E-books and audiobooks, those are more and more popular. Those are really expensive, and they're on subscription models, and so those are will have direct impact the funding as they predict it will be reduced pretty significantly in the next year, so which will affect some of our basic library services as well. So One of the other issues is, I think about is the workforce capacity at the federal level if we're looking at reductions in workforce. We buy all of the community's electricity from BPA, and we're on contract to do that. And if I had a new application for services that we needed to, we needed to put a new substation in because we have a new business coming to town. It's about a 9-month process to be able to, after you put that application in, to get an answer about whether or not we can serve that. And so with reductions in workforce, my understanding is, there's a good percentage of folks from a number of federal agencies that have taken exits or there's been a reduction in workforce. And just the time that it takes, because there are people that actually do the work, and so we'll have less of those people, and it will take longer. And again, it's in a system that's already very large and full of lots of regulation. It's really difficult. And as a local agency, we will be impacted by that. Through the pandemic, the supply chain issues, the delays were really difficult, and inability to get parts and pieces to build the infrastructure we need in our community. And if we think about sort of the mandates to electrify from our state, and thinking about how do we do that, we have to make sure that we're ready for that and we build our systems out. So we're planning for those things and working really hard to anticipate some of the challenges we might get in that area. And so, and I talked a little bit about transit funding too, and that those pass-through dollars. And what does that mean that, at some point we don't have dollars sitting, our local governments don't have money sitting around in hidden corners that we can just grab and, pay for millions of, street repairs and things like that. And so, but we're happy, if the system changes on how we fund things, the portion that can come typically that we could maybe count on from the federal government or the state government too, that means we have to rely on local sources differently. And that's really difficult because I know I just saw a survey today about when people are talking about affordability and not just housing affordability, but living affordability in not just this community, but every community. So it's on all of our minds, and I know it's on your council members' minds as well. So I'd be happy to answer questions when you're ready for those as well. I see our county auditor in the back of those too.
Good evening, everybody. Hey, I appreciate your patience. Sort of in the spirit of what Robbie was talking about, I had a conference of governments meeting, which is a intergovernmental group of all the city councils in the county that I sit on, and I just got off a Zoom call with a group that wanted to know more about elections. And I'm here talking to you about county finance, and such is the wacky world of county government, right? Where the hospital or the city might or even Fish might look more like a traditional corporation. County governments are set up in this weird way where it's all about independent electeds, and they decided that this guy, the auditor, was going to be the junk drawer of county government. He's going to have elections, and we're going to do titles for vehicles, and we're going to record your documents when you buy a house, and he could be the CFO of the county as well. So, but that's what we're here to talk about tonight. I caught enough of Heidi's presentation to be able to say that was a very comprehensive view of not just how what we're going to talk about tonight impacts the city, but also just kind of impacts the community too. Because oftentimes cities or counties are kind of a hub for where a lot of these federal and state grant dollars go, so that they can get out to the community's different nonprofits, right, through subrecipient agreements. So I think that was a really good segue. It's going to enable me to kind of talk about a couple of things and keep it sort of brief, because we're already at 8 o'clock tonight, and I want to respect everybody's time and give a good opportunity for questions. So I think what I'm going to start out, though, talking about, is I'm going to talk a little bit about the county's financial position and how that relates to other local governments, and then what the grant outlook is going to do to that financial position. But we've got to understand a little bit about county government fund accounting. So just like all public sector agencies in Washington State, we use fund accounting. They're independent entities with their own assets and liabilities, and they oftentimes have restricted expense and revenue sources with a few few exceptions, the biggest one being the general fund, which is unrestricted, and we can sort of spend on operations or projects as we see fit, right? And so the general fund, for the purposes of tonight's conversation, for my part of it, is kind of like what we use as the barometer of the county health, right? Because if we're doing things right, we have all these pots of money that are collected through different taxes and different fees, and they're for specific purposes, right? One that comes to mind would be like the 3/10 tax, which is part of the sales tax on criminal, for the purposes of supporting criminal justice. So that can be used by the sheriff, it can be used by the prosecutor, can't be used by the auditor's office, right? So we want to make sure we're maximizing the use of those resources before we're digging into the general fund, because that's our unrestricted pot of money, right? So what can loss of grants do? Well, oftentimes when we go out and get grants, we're funding specific things, specific programs, people, services, or projects, right? And oftentimes those reside within different funds. So if you have a sudden loss of grants, whether they're federal or state, and they're in within specific funds, the county then has to make bigger decisions about, do we continue those services, right? Do we continue paying those employees? And if the answer is yes, these are critical services that we either have to by statute or that we want to continue to fund, it's going to require us to dig deeper into our general fund a lot of the times to backfill that loss of funds, right? So it's really, it's a question of imbalance and instability, and that's kind of the period we're in right now. I already talked a little bit about the strategy and kind of what we do. So I'm going to compare a little bit 2024 and 2025. So in 2024, we had an adopted budget. This is an overall expense budget of $125 million, and we expected grant revenue to be $24 million of that. The rest, of course, is made up of taxes, fees, even loans, right? For like we have a big project right now going on for our transfer station. We're trying to build a new transfer station. And interest too from our investments. The largest grant that, I don't know, did you talk about ARPA at all? Okay, ARPA. So COVID happens, federal government goes, oh no, the economy is going to collapse. We've got to get funds into the hands of our local governments, right? Because of the impact on tax revenues. And we certainly saw an impact from COVID. We saw an impact in increased expenses. We saw an impact in, there was definitely some immediate impacts to the economy as things shut down. I wasn't in government yet, or at least I wasn't in local government. I was in the military at the time, but that all happened, and we sent a bunch of funds down to the local level, right? We call those ARPA funds. There's a second batch of it called the LATCF. I have no idea what the acronym stands for, but basically the sum at the county level is about $11 million that we were sent in 2020. Right? Huge infusion of cash. Well, then at the same time, something weird happened because we had, everybody remembers 2021 is a big year of a lot of inflation. What does inflation do to your sales tax revenue? It increases it quite a bit more than expected. So we experienced what I know a lot of other local governments experience, which is we had our ARPA funds, we had our sales taxes come in, and we suddenly had a huge surplus of cash that we didn't expect, especially given the fact that everybody thought bad things were going to happen in the economy. So, what have we done with that money? Well, we funded things like working on the rural broadband project. We put $1 million towards my county financial software that is going to hopefully, I'm very confident, will produce a lot of efficiencies moving forward as we off-ramp like a bunch of third-party softwares that we had that sort of goes to what's called an ERP system. So we're definitely excited about that. We built things at the airport. We funded some parts of the transfer station, and then we put a bunch of the funds back in the community as well, right? And we still had some funds left over. The deadline to appropriate those funds was actually this year, so we were able to apply those to various projects and also just kind of our general operating revenues for 2025 and beyond. But that money is gone now, right? And the county has, and the community has really looked at that source of funding, and this is kind of across all local governments, is like, you've got all this surplus cash, you can do things, you can fund projects, you can fund people, you can fund services. Well, that money is now spoken for, and that was the biggest pot of sort of this external federal and state funding source that we had. So we're in a position now where we realized and forecasted that we weren't going to have that funds, and that's why we wanted to really move towards a better model of like multi-year financial forecasting, which we've done with our county commissioners. But it's definitely a new environment because we we don't have that same buffer that we've had at least over the last 4 to 5 years. Meanwhile, while all this is happening, we have a reduction in grant revenue. So even before the new administration took over in January, we really had the impacts of the cuts at the federal level through DOGE and everything. We were already forecasting a 25% reduction in grant revenues this year. So that takes it from 24 to 18 million in what we were expecting in grant revenue. So we saw that happening going into 2025, and that was before a lot of the stuff occurred in January and February. So we would expect that a lot of those grants have already been secured or are in the process of being spent. But as we look to 2026, we start preparing our budget for that. I expect that to decrease significantly. And so what are we going to do about this? We're really emphasizing the culture of sustainability and self-reliance. We've got 3 kind of main functional areas across our county that are going to be hit the most by this. It's public health, because they have a lot of programs that directly come from both federal and state government to fund, combating infectious diseases, various social service programs. Our roads, from a capital projects perspective, is something that we're concerned about. I think I was looking at the numbers today. Roads had something like 2.6 million in intergovernmental revenues this year. So if that continues to decline, that's going to drive changes to our ability to service our county roads, which is something that we're already concerned about based on the trajectory of our expenses and revenues in our roads fund. And then, of course, our sheriff's office and our courts receive a lot of federal and state grant funds as well. So we're kind of looking at those 3 main areas of our county as being the biggest risk for this, and places where we're going to have to either make hard decisions about what levels of service we continue to provide, or reallocate funds from our general fund, right? Which is, of course, places a bigger burden on that unrestricted pot of money. So we're trying to do a better job of coordinating across the county. As I described county government, it's very segmented and siloed in its worst form, right? But if you have electeds who work together, you can actually still get a lot of value out of that system. I can just say in my role as the CFO, I'm an independent elected official, but in order to be effective in this role, I have to leverage both myself and my finance staff to work with the county commissioners. And you don't always see that in other county governments across the state. So I think the relationships we have are really strong, and I think they're going to enable us to address some of these challenges in some unique ways. Already talked about doing service analysis. We're working on some innovation stuff. We went to a self-insurance model 2 years ago, and so far we've cut our premiums for health insurance increases in half compared to what we would pay on the market. So we're seeing a lot of success there. We're maintaining a healthy balance in that fund. We've done some work with our fleet management and really trying to utilize and minimize the amount of vehicles that we have to maintain. And then just sort of at an intergovernmental level, we're trying to do a better job coordinating as well, right? So I talked about just coming from COG, the Conference of Governments. Well, Conference of Governments is a place where all the city councils send a representative. Actually, every city can send 2, and then the county sends 2. So it's a group of 12 folks, and it can kind of be whatever we make it out to be. But I'm really proud to say, over the last couple of years, we've really leaned into a model that is about supporting each other, and it's not just about my piece of the pie at the county, it's not just about Leona's piece of the pie for their problems, it's about how do we help solve each other's problems. As we enter a world where everybody is going to be subject to a more restrictive intergovernmental funding environment, that's going to be super critical. And then how do we advocate for each other either, right? If we're going to Senator Cantwell or Representative Schreier, and we're all asking for money, right? And we're not coordinated on our priorities, that sends a conflicting message. Where if we can go together and say, hey, this is the part of our community that really needs these limited resources, that can send a stronger message that ultimately is going to benefit all of us. So I'm really proud of that work, and we'll get through it together.
Name the program, that $7,000 program. I just was curious about the name of that program, and is it $7,000? How's that Is that appropriated, is that spread out among?
It's,
Just a little bit more about the details about that. The name of that?
it's the LPFA.
LFPA.
LFPA, thank you. I'm pathetic sometimes. Local Food Purchase Assistance, LFPA. And it was a program that allotted us $7,000, well, we were reimbursed $7,000 every month to buy food from local vendors. And we bought from farmers and some food hubs and producers here.
Thank you for that. I have just one question for Bryan, your auditor's office. Thank you. What, does the county hold any of its reserves? Are they in the stock market, or where are your reserves? You know, how safe are they?
So our true reserves reside in our funds, and there's various fund balances across the whole county. We do conduct cash flow analysis with our treasurer's office so that we can continue to pay our bills, and anything that is not needed for immediate cash flow, we do invest. So we invest through the investment pool, and last year I believe returned something on the order of $2.5 million in investment interest. So it is a way that we generate money. Those are all, of course, very safe, like corporate bonds, public sector bonds. We are not buying Bitcoin in the county investment, I promise.
It's called the local government investment pool, so the hospital participates in that too.
Mostly U.S. Treasury bonds is the bulk of what that is.
Would you
Public
please
entities are
repeat
very-
the question when someone asks?
Oh, the question was with our capital reserves, or our financial piggy bank, what do we do with it? Do we invest in the stock market or what? Being a public entity, being all of us are, we are very restricted on how we can invest it. So we can't invest, like Bryan said, in really the regular stock market. We can't buy Apple, we can't buy Bitcoin or stuff like that. It's mostly U.S. Treasury funds. And the state actually holds, it's called the local government investment pool, which is a investment pool where smaller local governments like us can invest with the state. The state manages that money with more secure funds. Yeah, and that money is accessible overnight, so one business day. So it's quite liquid in that sense.
Thank you everyone for being here tonight. Peggy and Jason and Heidi could identify some pretty specific funding streams that they expect to disappear or be reduced. Maybe I missed it. What funding sources do you anticipate actually being reduced, if you can anticipate?
Yeah, I can tell you where they would reside, right? So like in our roads fund, I expect that we will see a decrease in intergovernmental revenues, federal funding for like roads projects.
For what projects?
Roads projects, county roads projects,
thank
right?
you.
So roads, bridges,
Yeah.
all the county roads outside of the municipalities. I would say that's one that will probably take a hit. Public health, I would expect to take a hit, but I don't see that happening yet until 2026. We met recently with their department leadership, and they were pretty optimistic about where we are at right now. So I think if those cuts come, they'll come for the 2026 budget.
And those would be different than what Jason?
Well, I don't know what Jason said, but my guess is.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, different. Yeah, there's public health and the hospitals, two separate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, okay, yeah.
Thank you. First of all, you guys are all, appreciate your speaking. You're all very eloquent and seem to really understand and have a very good grasp of your areas. So thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Peggy, I think you sort of alluded to it, but I would just be curious from the different groups that are represented up there, what sort of advocacy efforts are occurring at the state and local level, the state and federal level? Because I imagine there's got to be, I know hospitals have organizations and advocacy groups that they can work through. Cities probably have associations that can do that. So I'd just be interested to know how this kind of information is being communicated, what these very local impacts are, how they're being communicated up the chain.
Yeah, really good question. So large hospitals, institutions have both departments dedicated to advocacy and people who are at Olympia or DC every day. The hospitals in Washington also have what's called Washington State Hospital Association, which is really our advocacy group that we are a member of, and they do a lot of the federal advocacy as well as state advocacy. And then WSHA calls on us hospital leaders. So for me, example, I was in Olympia about a month ago meeting with our representatives, Alex Ibarra and Warnick and Tom Dent, and talking about the impacts that the financial funding flows that we depend on and the impacts to healthcare at our local communities. So trying to help educate them on the impacts so that they can help out our backs when they're setting a budget.
Okay, Peggy had something to say about advocacy too, so, and I think the Dr. would refer to that.
I did, thank you. I was in DC in March with a group with the Food as Medicine, the National Coalition, and we had one day convening where we went through all of the legislative issues that are impact on us, and it's a lot of what I've talked about today. And then the next day we spent the whole day on the Hill and met with met with all of our legislators, but then I met with some others as well who have special interests in food banks and that sort of thing, to let them know from our perspective who was going to be hurt by what's coming down the pipe. We work, as you said, closely with multiple associations, and I email our legislators almost daily, both state and federal, with concerns. So we're very active in advocacy.
I would just add, the cities have the Association of Washington Cities that advocate for cities generally, in both at the state level and the federal level, because we are unique, again, having a natural gas and electric utility. We actually started working with a contract lobbyist the last couple of years to specifically advocate for those utilities, because our interests are different than a lot of cities when it comes to those specifically, but that's been focused at the state level. And then our transit agency has, Ellensburg Central Transit has kind of an advocacy group that works on their behalf at the state and federal level as well. And so there are other specialties within the city that have folks working for those services.
Yeah, I hit it on it at the end of my presentation, but COG was just talking, Council of Governments was just talking about that tonight on joint advocacy efforts and possibly going out for an RFP for a consultant lobbyist to either help us at the federal, state level, or both as we coordinate some of our efforts. I can tell you, and this kind of goes back to the previous question, right, Gretchen, right? Yeah, I think that one thing that popped in my mind that is an immediate impact on the community is that COG actually put forward money to help South Cleveland with their water and sewer system, and they expected to receive some federal funds, and then that didn't come through like they expected, right? So that's a direct impact on the community. It was as a result of kind of the change in the environment right there. So we're seeing a lot of initial impacts on those sort of like, hey, we're going to do a thing, and we think we got federal funds on the hook, and it's looking promising, and then no longer available.
Bryan, it kind of brings me a question to all of you. This all seems all new to all of us, for sure. And so I'm just wondering if you have any, and this is for all of you actually, if there any idea about how long it'll take for us to really understand how all of this is going to affect us as human beings in this county? Any idea, timeline?
I would say that you will see, from at least the county's perspective, I think some things might look different in 2026. We're starting the initial planning process with our commissioners on updating what we call running estimates or multi-year financial forecasts as we prepare for our budget retreat and ultimately when the departments come forward and make their request. And I think commissioners, to their credit, are taking the environment very seriously. And so that will drive some of these decisions about how do we preserve our unrestricted general fund and what are the things that we're actually statutorily required to do, and then what are the things that we need to reallocate resources and really invest in. So I would expect 2026 to be, at least at the county level, and I don't know if that will be felt externally, but internally for sure, we're leaning forward into a different environment.
And I would say the city adopts a biennial budget, so we're in the 2025 to 2026 range, but we also check the environment, check the balances, and make adaptations throughout that process. And again, we'll continue to do that. And I think, our environment is changing, and so as we know more, we're anticipating that there likely will be some changes in 2026 at the federal level. That gives us an opportunity to work with our own annual budget process, beginning in 2026 as well.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, for the hospital, impacts will probably start being seen as early as next year, and then a lot of it that we talk about is indirect impacts, so it's the uninsured population we expect will go up, so our reimbursement will go down as people become more and more uninsured, so it'll be a really slow-paced impact versus, because we have almost no direct federal grants from state or federal, whereas other institutions around here have a lot of that direct grant funding, so it'll be more immediate impact around. One thing the hospital is looking at is they are exploring doing a levy for 2026, so we're the only public hospital district in the state that doesn't collect levy revenue, so that is something that the board of commissioners are looking at as well.
We are here in 2026 as well. A lot of the funding that we get from aging and long-term care funding, I think I mentioned, is given in 2-year increments. And so that's already come from the federal government to the state. So we're not particularly worried about senior nutrition this year, but next year we could see some serious cuts. And we get bulletins and advisories from all sorts of associations and lobbyist groups, although we do not lobby, we advocate. And they're all telling us batten down the hatches 2026, so that we are taking steps towards being prepared for that.
Thank you for coming, for all the comments. We have a very diverse panel. My background is in healthcare, and my comment and question relates to disaster preparedness. How will state and federal budget cuts affect our ability as a city and county to respond to wildfires, floods, mass casualty incidents, anything like that, especially if we're losing funding to the hospital, which could then trickle down to loss of staff, loss of services, the needs are going to go up. And I just heard that FEMA has rejected a claim for the state of Washington, and they're going to appeal. So how prepared are we, and how will we, if at all, be affected by that?
Yeah, we do go through some mass casualty drills or mass emergency preparedness drills. And how do we prepare is we just keep practicing for them or trying to anticipate them. Probably our biggest concern or likely threat is cyber attacks. So 2 public hospitals in the state actually were cyber attacked with ransomware in the last 2 months. So that is a very real thing. We are an independently owned public hospital, but we still have to protect our cyber assets, our information system securities with all the same resource investments that your large systems like the universities and stuff actually. We can't cut any corners around that. So that's probably our biggest current risk that we see. And we're constantly preparing for that, constantly investing in our IT services. And it's critical to remain investing in those services.
So I think I heard a specific question there about wildfires, right? So county not directly responsible for it, but obviously we interact with a lot of agencies who deal with this every day. And, cities in the upper county are very concerned about it. If you've ever driven 903 through Oz and Ronald, my dad did 40 years in the fire service. Like that is in a bad situation, that's a death trap, right? And so, especially in our upper county, but really all over the county, wildfire is a huge concern here. I don't have specifics on what the cuts look like. I just kind of have the same information I think you do, which is we know that they're happening out there. I would just say that from our perspective, and I think this ties back to the piece I was talking about with COG about regional planning. If these resources going away, we really have like a couple of different options. One is the advocacy, right? We can make a compelling case jointly as a community to say, hey, this is why this is really critical, and it's not really a political thing, right? It's just, these are resources that if they go away, right, could lead to real loss of life and economic consequences in Kittitas County. And then I think there's another piece of it where we're also working amongst each other to try to see what we can do to develop good plans, right? To do good. This is where the county would come in, right? Where we're looking at, our community development services and, the requirements we have for like roads and accessibility and people taking advantage of different like Firewise programs, which, we know could be a risk as well. But it's kind of like an all the above, all the card of how do we prepare and insulate ourselves as best we can given the environment that we're in with federal funding, while also like simultaneously making the collaborative case that this is a real non-political issue and it's a detriment to our community.
I guess I would just add that I was at a training incident this last week, and the focus is making sure that we can be somewhat self-reliant as much as possible. And again, when we talk about the systems, if the systems start reducing the capacity to respond at a federal level, we need to, and the state level potentially too, we need to make sure we're prepared and exercising, working together, so we can take care of ourselves. And part of that goes to preparedness, individual preparedness too, trying to get messages out to people about be ready. And so major things can happen. I mean, not just 3 days, 2 weeks worth of readiness in your homes with foods and all the supplies that you need. And so it's just, sort of thinking that how can we help locally to make sure we take care of ourselves too.
Hi, so thank you all. So for all these issues and things that need funding, will there be or are there now opportunities for public input? And if so, if there is now, I know that you go to the county website or the city website, and that's the only way any of us know about any of these things. But it would be really nice if the public is able to give input on where we would like to see funding based on all of your budgets, that we are able to come to some meetings and
I'm sure everybody has their favorites, but I subscribe to something called The Hill, and I get an email 3 times a day, updating me on what has transpired over the course of the day. And I find that to be really helpful. Every one of our legislators have email addresses, and the aides tell us that the emails get attention more than a hand or written U.S. mail.
I mean locally.
Locally? I'm sorry, can't help you.
Yeah, I was gonna echo Peggy too. So what can you do? I always encourage people to sign up to vote, register to vote, make sure you vote, and reach out to your legislators, local, state, and federal government. We all have open public boards as well, so attending board meetings, or even just reading the board meeting minutes to ensure that you're educated when things come up to a vote. So the hospital has started recording all of our board meetings as well, so definitely encourage watching those board meetings. And we started doing something that's been really fun on the last board meeting, really highlighting a department every month. So we'll have one of the different departments or services come and present at our board meeting about the things that they do. And it's areas of the hospital that some people will never see and know that what goes on. So that's been exciting to help educate the public on what we do offer. And at all those communities, you can offer public opinion and comment as well.
So we're always looking for ways to educate and connect with people, and so we have all kinds of listservs that you can sign up for that will tell you when meetings are happening. We have agendas that are public and published ahead of time, and so and just we try to push out information. But vote, come to a meeting and testify, or you can send emails. Council members will meet with folks individually too. So just interact with the folks in your council are local people, and they care, and they want to know what you're thinking. And so I encourage you to reach out.
I was worried you were going to steal my thunder. Okay, one thing in addition to all that, because that's all great, boards and committees and commissions, right? So I can't speak for the hospital or some of the others like junior taxing districts, but I know like the cities and the county all have boards and commissions in which you can actually be a part of the policy development, right? So everything at the county from law and justice to developmental disabilities committee. We have our lodging tax committee, which has some pretty serious revenues that they get to allocate back in the community to promote tourism. So there's lots of opportunities for folks to, and some of them you have requirements, you have to be certain things or represent certain things, but definitely take a look at if you live in the city, take a look at the city's list, take a look at the county's list. If you live anywhere in the county, we are always looking for people to come and serve.
Good evening. And first, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for putting this on. It's very informative. I would also love to see younger people here. Maybe we figure out a way to get the message to people younger. But my question is this. There's a lot of executive directives coming out of Washington, and people are making decisions as to whether or not to comply with them. Harvard University, for example, recently declined to go along with a particular executive directive. Do you have examples now, or do you foresee any examples of where you will be in a position of having to think about complying or not complying with something that might be coming down the road to you?
I'll take the spicy question. For the microphone, I'll take the spicy question. All right, it's like you were at my presentation the other night, sir. Not funding related, nothing to do with money, so I'm putting on my elections hat right now. I think a lot of us know in the room, there's a lot of stuff happening with elections. There's a bill going through Congress which would change a lot of things about our current mail-in ballot process. There's also, was a couple weeks ago, an executive order that came down that, if implemented fully, would definitely have some impacts on our mail-in voting system. And so, to your question, the Secretary of State's office is partnering with the AG's office, and they are suing the federal government saying we are not going to comply with that executive order. That is now working its way through the courts. The best thing I can say about the position that we're in right now is that executive order applies to federal elections. So what that means is we have a lot of runway to get clarity from from the courts, from the state, from the federal government on how that actually gets implemented. But there's a very real scenario where we end up in July of 2026, because it applies to federal elections, when we have requirements about issuing ballots to folks who haven't met the citizenship verification requirements, and then also on the backside of that, when we actually receive ballots, there's a hard stop deadline for ballots to be received by election day, which is a very big change from our current system, which is postmarked. And so that is something I foresee on my medium-term horizon. And the best thing that I can say as an auditor, put on my neutral, not a policy guy, an administrator of these rules and regulations, is that I look forward to getting clarity on how we can do that, how we can best serve the voters in our community.
Yeah, we haven't had any choices where we've had to decide if we're going to comply or not. So as noted, everything's really been indirect. But the things that are happening, like tariffs, are already impacting us. So as the others have noted, inflation from about 2020 through right now has been quite high, and tariffs will continue to drive that up, and we're feeling that already in our supplies that we receive.
I don't know if this counts as standing up and saying no or not, but we are doing what we can to make sure people know what their rights are. We have trained our staff and our volunteers on what is required if ICE shows up, because we serve that population, what they are mandated to do and what they don't have to do. And I was really surprised at the flexibility that you have around that. And so we don't have to let anyone in the building, and that's a standing instruction for our staff. No one comes in the building unless they have a warrant. And even then, we have 24 hours that we would use. We've also provided red cards that are available that tell people what they have to do, what they don't have to do if they're approached. We've set people up with the Justice Project so they know what their rights are. And we have plans to set up a kiosk in our pantry reception area to help people go through the maze that the government is trying to establish to make it very difficult to get Medicaid. That's that's their plan for keeping Medicaid numbers low, just to make it really difficult to get on there. So we will have a kiosk and a trained person in our reception area at least 3 days a week to help people get onto Medicaid. And we'll continue to
I'll take that. I know you're ready for me, So attorneys are my best friend these days because they help me interpret. And as Bryan was saying, there is a lot of information coming out and a lot more than normal. And it's really hard to sift through it and understand how it impacts us. And so I'm relying on attorneys to help me interpret to help advise the city council. They are our decision makers. And the question, as a local government, we follow the laws. And so we're required to. And so helping them make good decisions, providing them with good information about what we can anticipate. Do you wait until something comes to you, or do you anticipate it? And so just watching and again interpreting all of the legal, all the information that's coming out. It's really tough and it's a lot of work.
Okay, I'll be the next question. Thank you for representing the organizations that you do. I'm concerned that we don't have anyone here tonight from the school districts. And I'm wondering if you have been in contact with them from your various standpoints regarding particularly early childhood, Head Start, and then students with disabilities, if there's been any conversation in terms of support from you to them.
I would just say I think that's a great follow-up. Actually, the superintendent, Troy Turnow, actually spoke at a Rotary Club last week, and I think doing a follow-up with the school district, having them talk about the programs, they'll have the inside story on that.
I'd just like to add that the school districts were invited, the Ellensburg School District at least, and they were in the middle of a strategic planning session tonight, so we were going to make it. But we may do this again. Additional, yeah. Yes, they were.
Thank you all for being here this evening. It sounds like our auditor, well, first of all, I want to thank you for the suggestion of emails to our representatives, state and national. I want to also suggest perhaps an email or such would be helpful to our auditor to push back against the bill that would require passports or, whatever else that's going to require the deadline, changing the deadline for mailed-in ballots. But I want to ask also for emails and such, do any of you have a specific question or, pardon me, a comment that would be helpful for those of us who do make phone calls or email our representatives and senators?
I think specifically it's just to not reduce funding for essential services, community services as the message. So.
Protect Medicaid, protect the Older Americans Act. Those are both and SNAP and the Summer Meals Program. All of those are under consideration right now for either discontinuing them or cutting them dramatically.
I was thinking it helps to do your homework, because I have about 50 messages that are running through my head, and it really depends on, and I think being specific and being, your legislators do listen, they do read, they respond, and so just, making sure that you take the time to know what you're asking for.
I would say, and I've seen some of y'all folks at the Braver Angels Sports Shop, which if you haven't been, I'd put a plug in for those as well. We're in a highly politicized environment right now, and I would just say when we're talking as a community and we're trying to advocate for different programs or advocate for each other, I think as much as we can tone down the political aspect of it and focus on the impact of the community, right? Just like we were talking about with wildfire funding, I think that's a really strong message to send.
One other thing I would say to you is tell a story if you have one. If you have a friend who accepts Meals on Wheels and know the impact that has, tell that story, because those tend to be the things that stick, especially if you're doing an email.
This might be a premature question to ask. This is the beginning of what we're doing right now. This has just started and we're going to be getting the effects of it. Do you have any idea what this is going to look like in another 4 years? Are we going to get more than study German history and you'll know?
The short answer is no. It just changes every week to every day. It's very different every day. The information that we're hearing, or just changes in the health of our community, changes in the resources that we're able to access, changes in the employment market. Everything's just changing rapidly.
So long for the ride.
I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen next week. So 4 years from now, I can't even go down that road, to be honest with you. I pray a lot.
One more question?
That's you.
Gretchen?
So, my question is very general. I guess I'm worried about how, as these cuts become clearer, how does the public find out about them? We have a couple of local papers, but they have 1 or 2 reporters apiece at most. The public needs to know why there is a reduction in services, why they are suddenly experiencing shortages or hardships that they didn't. And I'm wondering if you have the capacity or will have the capacity to put out press releases, or if they are just part of your regular communications. But I think it's really critical that we learn about these cuts as they happen.
Wonderful place for resources is our website, Kittitas County Healthcare's website, for everything that's going on, and then our board meetings and our board packets that you can find from our website speaks to things going on. And then we try to do outreach to the community to let people know when things are changing, if we welcome a new provider to our services, or we have one exiting. We try to make contact with anybody that we have in our system that may be impacted by that as well, to let them know of what's going on. And it's constant, but also, individual mailers, phone calls to people, all those things cost a lot of money, and we're talking about where we're going to find that money as well. So trying to come up with the most efficient venues to get that information out. And again, it's something that we also welcome feedback on, how we can continue to evolve that and get our messages out. But I know for the hospital, we put a lot of effort into our monthly board packet, so it's kind of a monthly news. It gives a lot of information by every division of the hospital, things that are happening.
I would say the same. We try to, yes, our website is sort of like a library. You can always go there and find information, but you can also sign up for notices that will push information to you. So encourage it and share with your friends. And so, and again, council does all of their work in a public meeting. And so the packets that we put together have background information, there's process, and oftentimes a staff analysis and the staffing reports and stuff too. So you get a little background on the issue and show up and participate. And so, again, the council wants to hear what you have to say. Okay.
All right, thank you very much to our